Andrew, welcome to the podcast. Yes.
Well done. That was smooth.
Yeah, much better. Really good. Really good.
You can have me celebrating at the end. Yeah, there we go. Outro. The way we design and deliver architecture is changing fast. We're moving beyond static drawings and into a world of living in data-rich models. Buildings are no longer just structures, they're connected systems. Cities aren't just planned, they're becoming intelligent, dynamic and responsive. And at the heart of it all is the digital revolution that's reshaping how we think, design and build. Today, we're diving into the world of digital design and smarter cities, where BIM meets master planning and where parametric tools and digital twins are changing not just what we create, but how we create it and who we collaborate with along the way. It's one of the most exciting and fast-moving areas in the built environment, and one that every design leader needs to understand. So who better to explore this with me than Andrew Victory, Global Director of Digital Design at Broadway Malyan. Andrew brings over 25 years of experience at the cutting edge of architecture, urban design and engineering. He's held global leadership roles, driving digital transformation across design and delivery. And today, at Broadway Malyan, he leads the firm's digital strategy, from BIM and automation to computational design and digital twin integration. He's someone who doesn't just talk about digital transformation, he builds it into real-world projects and teams. Andrew, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
I'm assuming you haven't done one before, or have you?
Not a podcast, no, I don't believe. Oh, no, sorry, I have. Apologies, I have, but it was not like this. It was a virtual event.
Well, welcome to the AEC Innovators Circle.
Thank you very much.
So, we are talking about digital design and smart cities today, so it'd be really good to, I suppose, get your view on it, right? They are buzzwords within the industry, but as a leader, I suppose, how do you position both of those?
I mean, it's a broad topic. I mean, to be honest, you end up with everyone has a kind of an opinion on what constitutes digital design, and is it more focused on the digital piece, or is it more focused on the design the concepts around the design process, I should say. What I think for me it really encapsulates is how are you going to use technology to do your design processes? How are you going to implement faster ways of working that can be achieved from technology through in that design process? And potentially where can technology take you in terms of the creative side of things, or in terms of the design process as well? So it really can be quite a broad church, let's call it. It can be anything from trying to come up with new innovative design processes, to finding out how to streamline how you do the design process, really, and also around the engagement with the other people that might be involved in that design process. So it's about bringing technology to design, really. In relation to smart cities, I mean, I think the more and more I read on smart cities over the years, the more I recognise that actually there's many proof points that have been going on anyway within the industry. They might not have been called smart, they might have had other names in them. I think there's also a kind of slight negative connotation to the concept of smart cities, because of the idea that smart, we're implying that cities haven't been running themselves smartly before the idea that technology was on board, and kind of shining a light on and scrutinising how they run themselves. And when you can consider how long cities as a place for humans to live has been around for as probably as long as humans, really. If you read books like *Sapiens* and things like that, it gives you lots of insights around that and civilizations. Clearly, cities know how to run themselves. It's just then, okay, well, with the changes happening around digital and data and information, and and the emerging of AI and everything else around that, it's how can cities get the best use of what's coming out from those advances that's happening in the industry.
So, given that on both the city and the digital design, I suppose what are you seeing the biggest shift in the industry, moving towards these builds, but also, I suppose, what's lagging behind? And I'll just give you some remit on that, is that other guests we've had on the podcast, but also people I'm speaking with, is that, when building buildings or cities, one thing they're finding very hard of is they're building, but they're not always getting some of the data and information back to actually get that smart reading. And that's what I'm seeing from a lagging behind perspective. But what are you seeing both from a shift, but also what you see lagging behind in your workflows?
I think one of the areas I'm definitely seeing where there is a very clear shift happening, which maybe is to do with just the advancements of technology, maybe it's to do with the cultural, culturally people are feeling more comfortable with it, is in relation to mobility. Definitely I'm seeing around infrastructure generally. water, for example, as well as, as I say, trains and highways and everything in the middle of that. I've definitely started to consider, okay, what is the information that's available to us? How can we organise the information that we're receiving on that stuff? And also, how can we get better results from the infrastructure that's in place, especially for some of the older cities where some of that information is maybe lacking or doesn't exist. And so it's a little bit of how can we start to gather that information and structure it in an effective way for a use case? Water is a kind of easy one, often picked at because of the fact that clearly there seems to be a public opinion that there is opportunities to improve that flow, pardon the pun, but there seems to be opportunities where, okay, how do we connect the information around what's happening to that asset, to maybe the materials that are running through it and things like that. And from a mobility perspective, I think you could argue that there's aspects of data that was being collected, even, if I think of the city I live in, London, Oyster cards and things like that, which have been around for quite some time, were a method and a means for people to already start catching some data that might not be quite real time, but it gives you a lot of data around how people use spaces and how people move around spaces and things like that. And, I think things such as COVID showed some really impressive examples when the data was looked at as a before and after, and then now after COVID kind of approach. You're seeing that there was information there that's been valuable, and it can actually represent what the impact has been on humans living in those cities when things like that have happened.
So I suppose the question on that is, as you mentioned, cities being around for a long time. Why is it important to be smarter in a sense of the smart city? Why is it important to try and really understand the data from all these cities? Why are we driving this?
I mean, from a lot of the reading I've done on this and continue to do and find fascinating, it does seem to be different cities have different problems they're trying to address, and different approaches about what's important to them to take on for the city. In some ways it's where they see opportunities for inefficiency, and there is an argument for cities to use digital methods to kind of bring forward or bring to light inefficiencies and then create some level of order and structure to that. But then from a human perspective, which is really at the core of what drives a lot of these smart cities, really, approaches or use cases, I should call it, it's a little bit of a different dynamic, because then it's less around the assets and less about commercial means, and it's more about, well, what does it mean to the public that use that space, and how can they get better improvements from the quality of how that space is being used, but also, what does that impact them and how their decision making has in terms of how they might perceive the space, be it transient when they're only there briefly, to be it when they live in the city. And I think, those smart city concepts even, I think, are quite interesting when you think about who is it that's engaging with that environment. Is it going to be someone that's transiently arriving at that location, and should there be a feeling that you're in a smart city as a tourist arriving in a space? How comfortable do we feel with that? Will we feel a level of surveillance, or actually will we feel a bit of welcome and feel comfortable with the idea that we've been welcomed somewhere, and we feel that they are kind of helping us navigate that city? Or is it going to be a different scenario where, the populations that live in these cities actually want to have more informed decisions around what things are prioritized to undertake within the cities? And that's where digital can really play a part in that, because you can have, planned, forecasted data, and kind of what the actuals will show you as well. And obviously that plays on many buzzwords like digital twins and lots of other areas like that. I think, I think what's been interesting that I read in the last few years around that, and it really kind of has made me think quite differently, is that concept of systems of systems. And, I know that played out a great deal in the UK in terms of some of the, and I'll probably get the terminology wrong, but national digital twin programs and things like that. But, and again, in other countries as well. But, that the idea of systems of systems and what are we going to connect around those systems, I think is something that I don't think we fully know or have worked out. What are the right ones to connect? What are the ones to keep siloed? What are the ones that have a redundancy to them after a while? What are the ones that we should care about keeping a longer term? And, we're seeing lots of scenarios where awful things have happened, where we do want to have that concept of golden threads and things like that, to kind of have that data from historic decision making, and to see how it's going to play out for the future for everyone else that's involved in that.
And how can, the population's grown faster than we can fathom, and a lot of it's coming and going with the AEC industry. Is how do we going to be responsible for building, especially for the next 10, 20, 30 years or so, right? And it sounds like, like you said, learning from the data from the smart cities and efficiencies. How can smart cities help build, in population growth in Africa and other places like that? How can we learn from the cities we have today to actually help with some of this, the population demand or even the demand on the AEC industry to build faster, quicker and more efficiently?
I think the sad truth is that all three of those the faster, quicker, better quality, and lower cost. The other
that's the other one. The
other main paradigm in the middle of that all. The sad thing is all those people have their own motivations in those areas, and I think that's a real challenge to kind of tackle. I mean, in terms of lessons learned, we've learned that there's a rejection sometimes of building low quality, fast, predictable cost output sometimes in some parts of the way we live, and then there are other times when there is actually a need and a sense of urgency needed where quality is less of a priority, but actually output, speed of output, and the cost is kind of the ones that are kind of things that just are taken on as a need, as a must. So I think the sad thing is I do feel that paradigm of all three, quality, time, and money, are all still always going to be in there, I think, in the mix. But in terms of lessons learned, I think one of the things, if I think of some other countries where they didn't have a lot of the infrastructure in place for stuff like that, there's a kind of that there's a benefit for them obviously there, because then they haven't got all that historical way of working and that embedded way of thinking, where they're looking at how can we incrementally improve what's already there.
They don't have the bad habits.
They don't have the bad habits.
Right.
They don't have the bad habits, or they don't have an existing system where they're trying to work out, okay, how do we improve this system? They have a blank slate to start with, and then go, okay, well, what's the art of the possible now, and into the future. Now, even there, I think we're still in a mix, because some of it still relies on infrastructure being physically built rather than it be like a wireless environment where there is still flexibility on that infrastructure, because as new 5G, 6G onwards ever emerge, it's a kind of, the transition will feel easier in some sense from a digital technological perspective, but from a cultural perspective, there can still be a hell of a lot of rejection around that. And I think I always love the graphics and the graphs that you see where you show that nothing happens on something for a long time, and then out of nowhere it's that hockey stick kind of approach where you see this huge step up. And I think it's always exciting to see where that's going to be. But as I said, I wouldn't say the smart cities in relation to infrastructure, I've felt it as being a hockey stick. I've just felt it as a slower growth, but a recognition that it's important, and a recognition that there is value in the information that was produced, and that there is value in trying to keep it relevant and keep it up to date.
Totally agree. When we talk about digital twins, IoT, and all the buzzwords, right? I know you don't use tools for tools' sake, and I know as part of digital design and both smart cities is going to be important roles, and we've already talked around data as well. But you're very much outcome led, right? So a lot of people are talking about the buzzwords as well as AI. You could throw that in there as well. But I suppose how do you drive these initiatives? How do you know that? I had a discussion the other day that digital twins are very much playing their place. I know I mentioned about you using them as well, but they're not sometimes driving the outcomes of certain cities or buildings that are trying, which is the cheaper, faster, and more cost efficient and more carbon neutral in a sense. So how are you driving both using digital tools but replying to outcome? Because I know that's a lot what you talk around is the outcome driven policies.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question, to be honest. I think the outcome, the reason I try to focus on outcome is because often with technology, you're touching on people's habits and people's way of working, which is what they've in self have recognized or felt that is the right approaches to kind of do stuff. And so to get them to change their way of working, it is a a thing where you have to kind of not persuade them as such, but make them feel that you're making the decision, you're trying to help them in their decision making and why something is a better approach in the other sense. So, the outcome side of things ends up being, well, look, I know that you're doing it this way, but if you do it this way, you might end up with a better result. Now, don't get me wrong, there are times that you have to put your commitment on the line and kind of say, look, I do really truly believe that this will change the way you feel about the approach and feel about having to put down the tools that you've already used. But the thing I've often said in advance to them on occasions is that and I'm going to use, unfortunately, a BIM one because it's one I've experienced many times, is the move from CAD to Revit or BIM or whatever BIM technology you're going to use in the terms of 3D modeling or in a parametric modeling kind of environment. The thing I've said to them is, look, you're going to do the transition, you're going to hate the first project, you really are going to hate it, and you're going to want to go back to things the way they were. And the second time, you'll start to see the value, you'll start to feel better about it on the second project, and you'll start to feel that it's more appropriate for what you need. And then by the third time, you have a strong opinion, usually. By the third project, they have an opinion on how we should be doing it, and they actually think, well, no, we should be using the tools, but slightly different to the way they are. And it does have to be that kind of three-phase approach, or that from my own experience of how people feel about it. And so it ends up having to be something where you are giving them some level of commitment as to timelines on that change, and also always recognizing that it's hard and it's difficult and it is a learning journey, and it's a challenging one, and that you are always going to feel the pressure. And even from my personal phone, there was times when I, for fun, would swap from one operating system to another one between contracts.
I would never do that.
Just to see how that felt, what that experience was like, and it was hard. It was really hard. It was really hard. I mean, I have to admit, I haven't done that in the last 10 years, but I used to do that. I've kind of just given up on that, and just because I've learned from myself. But I used to do it just for experience, just to see for myself, okay, what does that feel like in terms of a change, and how comfortable and how frustrated am I getting with it, and then how do I feel if I go back to the other one, and relief and all that sort of stuff. And I think the most important thing is, I do focus on outcome, because if you focus on the tool, you're going to lose them often, because they feel that all you care about is that they use this tool instead of that tool. And that can't be just the reason. You have to give them a bit more reason as to what that reason for that tool might be. Could it be work more effectively, prepare themselves for the future skills, or it could be that the deliverables that we need for a project will mean that you've got a hell of a lot of back end tidying up and cleaning up and reorganizing to get the data in a way that is going to be effective. So it is as again, I'm going to use a buzzword now. The customer journey is important, and they are a customer. They're always a customer to me, because they're the ones you're trying to kind of bring along in that journey for change, and they're right to challenge you all the time as well as to what things are and how things are, and they know projects. But
you've led digital change on a global scale, right? And I suppose, out of the lessons learned, times you've done it, is there something that still the industry hasn't learnt from that, or?
I learned what I learned, and I learned from my peers in my old companies and in my industry in general, is there has to be a sense of ownership as well for that change to happen. It can't just be yourself doing the change. That they have to own that change and believe in that change. That's the thing I would say that I've learned the most, and it is absolutely all about people. You can write the most amazing documents on standards or whatever you want to call it in the world, and if they don't see value in being able to use it and feel that it's going to give them value, then it's just going to sit there, and no one, and before you know it, it becomes redundant, becomes outdated, becomes rejected completely, and then it's just not worth that kind of pain. So for me, it's about the people, 100%. I mean, and it is about making them feel that you're doing things in support of making them better at what they can do, you know, and being there as a support to them.
It's funny because obviously us being a company, we do a lot of change for
absolutely.
for companies, and it's quite interesting because the changing point, you feel an improvement and stuff like that, but then 3-4 years go by, and there's something I try and work with key stakeholders is that how do you measure the change and the impact of change? Because you go 4 years down the line, you forget how much change had an impact on you, right? And is that something you try and say to people as well? It might not be a return on investment, but it might be a return on impact. It might be, like you said, around the efficiencies and things like that, which is why you do change.
Yeah.
How important is that to have as a key stakeholder group? Or
you've got your hard metrics and soft metrics. You know that you try to. Soft metrics is obviously quite people's feelings, how they interact, maybe engagement, maybe responses they give to surveys, whatever it might be. And then you've got the hard metrics, which is, does the data in the back end reflects that change happening? And again, it's usually the hard data often happens without the engagement of the people, and it's very black and white in terms of its result, you know, and in terms of what it shows you when you look at it in enough detail. But I think, you know, that's one of the areas I've definitely seen that works well. I think the other thing that I've learned, again, through just slightly long career now, is is the idea to really do reflect back on what you achieved and what you've managed to get done. I can't say enough how important it is to maybe every 6 months, every year, just to write back some notes around what did you achieve that in that quarter, in that half year, in that year, in terms of progress, and then make sure you read it back and it resonates back with yourself. And then, you know, and then start looking at that even from 3 years ago. And you'll be surprised because we're so focused on keeping running, keeping moving, keeping things going, making sure that there's positive things happening, that you often forget to just look back and go, actually, you know what, we've managed to get quite far in that time. And it's just a moment of reflection. So it is sometimes a pain for people to kind of spend a little bit of time writing stuff down. But I do really think it's a good idea. I'm just thinking as we're talking as well, I've just remembered there was like things that I remember reading in a couple of books once, which was like, you know, to write a story to yourself in the future, or to write a little note to yourself in the future, you know, and then to go into the future and open up that note and see where you are, where you want to be. I think, you know, I'm just thinking as well, Matthew McConaughey, you know, in one of his Oscar talks, he talked about specifically that as well.
10-year me.
Yeah, looking at the future you know, and I think I agree with that, and I get what he's saying with that, but I think it's also important to look backwards and reflect, because that's where you'll see that transformation did actually happen for a company, and did it happen in the short term, mid term, and long term.
So going a little bit back to smart cities now, which is going to be an important topic, especially as we go into the tech. But just, I suppose, from a controversial point of view, it gets criticised quite a lot around its tech initiatives, a lot around its sensors, its dashboards, surveillance, and all that sort of stuff, rather than sort of livability and things like that. So this is where I suppose I see that sometimes the negative around the buzzword of smart cities, right? But the tech also, as we've just mentioned, it also plays a massively important role. So it'd be really interesting to hear your opinion of, I suppose, we talked about the outcomes, we talked around change, we talked around the cities there, but also, I suppose, a little bit more around why the tech's important, and how do you maybe connect the two? Because it is getting, as I said, the smart cities is a lot of people are focused on the tech, and it seems to be getting a lot of criticism. But me personally, I feel like it's needed from a lot of leaders I'm speaking to. But then you speak to somebody, it's more around outcomes, livability, and apply it. So be interested just to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I feel slightly strongly on this one in terms of that we are right to kind of kick back at technology and where technology goes. I think it's important to always give feedback around where we want technology to go, and we have to kind of recognise that technology as a whole is all about, in general, yes, it is about making things better, and yes, it is about trying to improve quality of life and everything around, everything around the humans that, and everything that we want for ourselves. But at the same time, you always have to be kind of conscious of the motivations of technology, and its motivations are often around adoption, making you engaged as long as possible, absolutely giving you value, but also making sure that you are on that system, using that system as much as possible. So I think it's up to us to kind of work out when we want to reject that slightly, or where we feel that there's boundaries that shouldn't be crossed, because we shouldn't worry about that, because I think once we do that, they just turn into another direction, and they realize that there isn't a commercial space for that, or there isn't an opportunities for it to go that direction, where there's a further engagement or people engage with it more, and they'll pivot to something else that we might find more valuable and might find more interesting. And again, I don't say that as a criticism, because I do think technology, in the way that it's built and the way it's being brought to our world, is with that idea of, okay, how can technology be used for us? So we do have to kind of then be critical to ourselves on, well, okay, is it going in the direction we want it to go, or is it not going in the direction we want it to go? So I do think,
and just on that point, just there, sorry, but is that the question I suppose is sometimes hard, is like, have we stopped designing for the people, or are we so obsessed with, say, the performance metrics, the tools, the data? And I think that's the hard bit. Are we still designing for the people, like you said, who had to live in these cities and work in these cities and visit these cities, right? And I think that's a really hard conversation.
It is, and again, you have to kind of do a few things in that space. You have to kind of work out, well, is it in relation to, are you building it from a commercial perspective for maybe the clients you're working with, or is it more for the benefit of humanity in general, or is it more an R&D for yourselves to kind of understand where it could go, and exploration and on that side. I think the reality is that not one size fits all, and different parts of the globe like to live in different ways, and I think we need to be respectful of that, and also understand that, okay, maybe that isn't the way that we want technology to go in the places that one of us might live, but that doesn't mean that it's not the same. It should be the same for globally. I don't think we'll be able to kind of get that landscape exactly right. I think it is a mosaic really of colour in terms of that. In terms of the design process, that is a huge topic, because even with, if you take technology out of the equation, it's in some ways an argument around form and function. Are you designing because of the beauty of the form, or are you designing because it's got functional purposes? And so I think that stuff can't be pinned on technology, if I'm honest. That needs to be pinned on the creator to kind of work out if what they're trying to achieve is in line with what the aspirations or the outcomes, again, unfortunately, of what was expected for that.
So Andrew, I suppose, as working on cities or buildings and, across multiple teams or functions is getting more complex. I know part of around what you look at is not just the design, but also the processes you just mentioned there. Now, one thing I see is it's very hard to, BIM leads, working with architects, working with IT, working between engineer, architect, construct, it's how do we improve the collaboration between those? And it'd be really interesting to see the tools are coming in, and how we utilize tools, as we mentioned, but it also comes with a load of people and teams that have to apply that and how they all link together. It'd be really good to get your view on that.
Yeah, I think the thing in that scenario is that everyone that they're all representing different parts of the business, and they all have different priorities and different ways of deciding what good looks like. And from a IT on technology perspective, we might be like, you're using the most cutting edge technologies out there, you're trying to push the boundaries of what the technology can do and everything like that, whereas other parts of the business might be like, well, no, we're trying to push the boundaries of design, and then others are, we're trying to push the boundaries of the human experience, and stuff like that. So you have all those kind of layers in the middle, and then you've got another stakeholder which is caring about, is the project profitable, and is it is it being a right project to take on. So I think, I don't think that's disappeared. I remember reading this book called the Phoenix Project, I think it's called, and it made me laugh really out loud actually on the train when I was reading one section of it, because it talked about business and IT, And it said like it felt like sometimes a dysfunctional marriage where neither of them was feeling as they're getting the best out of each other, but they realise that they have to work together. And I thought that sounded quite hilarious because I could understand both perspectives on that because both sides are trying to get the best out of the relationship. Again, I think there's a lot to be there's a lot of value from even hard experiences together. And I think that there ends up being, that work-based experience, work-based learning experience, I think they call it, where you definitely have teams that have had awful experiences together from my career, I've noticed. But they seem to have a mutual respect and mutual bond where on the next project, they now realise each other's character traits and kind of find ways to move forward. And I think architecture and the design process in general is really in the thick of that, really, when it comes to the collaboration side of things. I've seen some fantastic graphs online of the different stakeholders and different consultants that any one architect might have to work with, and it was like in the 30, 40 plus for many projects, and really they're playing like an orchestration role, really, and around trying to bring everyone together and everyone feel that they're getting the best out of the project, really, and out the experience of being together in that project. The sad thing is often as well, that a little bit like flight attendants, flight staff. You always think of flight staff on planes that they are all together on every single flight, week in, week out, and then when I've met some of the staff on those flights in a conversational way. They've often said, no, we meet on the flight, and then we never we might not see each other again for another month. You're on different flights, then we're completely different people, and I think it makes me laugh because it makes me think, okay, so imagine you've got these people all having to try to work together. They're only going to be together maybe for 10 hours, and then they won't see each other again for a month. So how do you get those processes in place where they all feel like that they're working like a structured organism, if I can call it that, and then I think it's the same also with AEC projects. That often it's not the same companies all working together project after project. It's often teams put together for temporary purposes to then come away from each other, and they might bump into each other. I mean, I think the one interesting and exciting and good thing about AEC, it is actually quite a small community. And I think, I think I've even said, we've spoken in the past, and I think you've even said that, that it's everyone talks to each other, everyone knows each other. Absolutely. There's a kind of level of that,
everyone shares a camaraderie of the common pain, right?
Exactly. So I think that's maybe the underlying things that we kind of start to recognize the projects, the challenges around projects. But does technology play a part in that? Yeah, absolutely. I mean, do platforms play a part in that? Absolutely. How do platforms play in that scenario? I mean, the whole idea of federated platforms and all that sort of stuff kind of makes me laugh sometimes because, we spoke about a platform where everyone works together, and now we've ended up with a series of platforms that all need to talk to each other. It's like little mini cities all having to talk to each other. And so we haven't quite fixed that. And I think deep down there's obviously something else going on as to why we are temporarily put together in that sense.
Great. I mean, you mentioned BIM. The UK had quite a successful BIM program, and BIM was bringing sort of controls and policies and how to work together and all those sort of things, right? So, but a lot of people are saying BIM has stagnated a bit. Critics say that it's being used more for documentation than collaboration. What's your view?
That is a difficult one.
It's a grenade.
That is a grenade actually, because it's one that there's lots of people out there with strong opinions on this on social media and all sorts of stuff. So I think I think the challenge has been that not everyone has agreed on what BIM actually represents. And, even at its core, is it building information modeling or is it building information management? And so is that the same for everyone? And, the argument I don't think has been fully agreed upon. And, even me saying that, I'm sure there's loads of people that would listen to this and go, what the hell are you talking about, Andrew? This is already decided. We know exactly what it's going to be. And And
I agree with you, by the way. I hear the same. So yeah.
So I think, the one thing I would say that I find slightly, maybe not depressing isn't the right word, but slightly still like, okay, you have to have thick skin about it, is that, I felt that the BIM world was something I wanted to embrace back in 2004, 2005 was when I first started to get a hint towards that kind of world. And then in 2006, 2007, really started to get luckily exposed to what that could look like. And even then, the discussions were very much about the why, the benefits. What should I do when I get my return on investment? Yada yada yada. And I can honestly say, in the last couple of years, it still comes up in topic all the time. And and you kind of think, gosh, have we not moved on from that? And I think one thing I've felt, and again, I'm not deferring away from the question, so I will come back to it. But digital twins, when that turned up as a word and as a means, I remember lots of discussion, lots of debate, hilarious pictures online of people, showing a petrol can with BIM there, and digital twins was adding fuel to the fire. But I think then I did do a lot of research on digital twins just to make sure I felt like I'd had an educated answer on it when people asked me about it. So I did, a great deal of reading, quite obsessive about it for a good couple of years. And then I realized that, back in the NASA years, back in the years of the 60s, there was already discussions of digital twins. It was just not talked about as digital twins. It had different terminology. And space shuttles were built with these concepts and these frameworks in place, V models and all sorts of scenarios around value. And then I think what I realized is that how will they feel about that? They would feel exactly the same way, thinking, God, it's a new word, but doing the stuff that we've been doing. And I think BIM feels, I would argue, somewhat the same, and the GIS crowd feel very similar, and I feel like I've learned a huge amount from the GIS community, in terms of personal experience with people that had as many years as me of experience but in the GIS space, and they felt similar. They felt like there was an erosion happening from BIM emerging to encroaching into how GIS worked, but at the same time there was things about GIS to do with web applications and dashboarding and stuff that they were leaps and bounds ahead of where BIM has been taking that side of things. I think, the thing that people have been able to agree on is the information piece, the I bit. And I think that's managed to stay there, in terms of, an understanding and a recognition that, yes, sometimes it's for one purpose or another, but in reality, at the core of it, it's about, okay, there's information being produced in a digital environment. Hopefully there's some level of common language and common understanding of how that information is being produced and how it's going to be structured and communicated back to the supply chain. But at the core, that bit hasn't changed. So I'm open-minded about that stuff, and I think whatever works for people is the best word I'll use in that scenario.
Good. Now, you mentioned a few things there around some processes, and we mentioned BIM, but one thing also in the digital world for AEC right now, there's a lot of digital noise, number of applications that have been adopted. You could talk about Revit, Rhino, Enscape, all the other ones are going on. There's a lot of digital noise, right? And I suppose it's a hard landscape to navigate, as well as, the last podcast talked about AI. It's now 1,700 odd AI tools to the AEC tools. So there's so much digital noise out there. I mean, it'd be interesting to hear your view around, if there's a digital process or a singular process or some sort of digital noise you would remove from the industry, is there a particular thing you would take out, add in, something we have to do? Because I speak to quite a variety of key stakeholders that, a lot, like you said, a lot of people do a lot of different things with a lot of different tools and using it in a lot of different ways, right? And I know we talked offline a little bit around how we standardise construction and some of the conversation around that, which is another thing for building quicker, smarter, cheaper cities. But I think a lot of it starts with a lot of this digital noise. So it'd be interesting.
I think, in terms of the technology portfolio, it's definitely got hugely harder than it was from a management perspective. From a evolutionary perspective and change that's coming, obviously we're in a very exciting time because of all these different ones that are emerging that one day will, some of them will become, the core for many of us. What that specific one will be, who knows? We're not quite sure how that will play completely. But I think the best thing I would suggest is to always look at it from a portfolio perspective, and never to look at it from a singular couple of tools perspective. Because if you do too much rationalizing, you have to be very, very sure around the roadmap for those technologies for the future to make sure that you have made those right decisions. And I don't think anyone can really effectively at the moment have confidence in what the roadmap will be, even for those existing tools that we're all using. Because in the past, we relied on the yearly releases of products to kind of give us some exciting new features that we might find effective in the way we work. But I think what we've all come to recognize in the last sort of 5 odd years at least anyway, is that those roadmaps sometimes are 6 months old at best. And we all see many technologies, and again, I don't mean any specific vendor, I mean across the globe, where they have safe harbor statements at the beginning of all their tooling, because at the beginning of all their presentations, because they're trying to work out through the processes that they're developing are people going to engage with these new features? Is it going to make commercial sense to develop those features? And so because of that, it's a safe harbor environment. And unless you're going to be able to have a very, very solid, educated understanding of what you and all your peers are going to take on, there's no clear way that will change. Now, yes, we could debate government policies around certain tools, mandating of certain tools, mandating of certain platforms, mandating of certain file formats and interoperability, and we could definitely hypothesize and debate on where that could go, and everything like that. But I think the thing that we have to be is flexible on the approach to technology. Now, you do also have to be, with the existing portfolios, you should be looking at the features of those portfolios and making sure there is actual, tangible differences between the features of the products, and there is a good way for it to be useful for the next step on that chain. But if there isn't enough of an argument around that, then you need to kind of work out which ones you're going to get rid of, or decommission, or find ways to migrate to. I think all the areas are moving at really interesting. I mean, visualization is moving at a pace that is incredible. Yeah. It's incredible, and it's really exciting. I think it's very hard at this moment to really recognize what that will look like in 2 years' time. Yes, there's lots of discussions around image to 3D models and things like that, and there's lots of discussions around maybe it won't go that far into the future. Lots of discussions around immersive and where will immersive go with that, and and will people be doing immersive adjustments while on the fly? And do we want clients to be able to have some level of complete control over that of that output, and then not give them some guidance and some direction on that? So it's very interesting. I think the harder bit is the middle bit. I think we're all seeing that there is opportunities emerging where technology is going to be very effective at that front end concept stages. There's some very good examples of coming out where potentially one day that asset management piece and that construction to asset management piece could really start to come a bit closer together. It's that middle bit in between those two stages, which I think is where there's a huge amount of change and disruption, and I think, unfortunately, it won't be the same size and same fit for all markets and all geographies. I think it's going to be potentially different geographies approaching that middle layer, that middle section differently. And I think at that point you have to reflect on what sort of companies you work at, because that will kind of give you some indications of where it could go.
How much are you finding the end users are being part of the strategy? Just because the way I see, take architecture for example, they're part designer, part technologist now, but they also have to be part strategy, because a little bit like you said, is you can't can't put all your eggs in one basket from a technology standpoint because you have to be very, very sure. So how much are you finding them being part of the major strategy around digital design or where practices are going?
I think they definitely play a big part in it, because I think they're the ones that will engage with it and decide on what to reject or what to accept, in the purest sense. But I think on the top down, let's call it, on the policy side of things, I think that there is some areas there that we can kind of give some direction and some support around what is the best directions to go. I think realistically they do have to be engaged in the process. I mean, I think in many ways, unfortunately, from a technologies perspective, many of the softwares that are emerging rely on that what's happening on projects and the pain points that are happening at end user, because they rely on that end user to be the kind of one that one gives them feedback around how useful the technology or the tool is, and also they're the ones often on the delivery side of projects, and so they're ones that will make sure that bottom line will be met, in terms of profits and things like that. The top line is where the responsibility is of technology, of companies to work out, well, where does technology support that top line for a company? So I think it's a little bit of both. I think, I'm going to say the word AI. I know we've tried desperately not to talk about AI, and I'm doing the same.
Yeah.
I'm doing the same.
It's hard not to talk about it.
It's hard
right?
not to talk about it. But I think it's the I think it's the human piece of it. It's the soft skills that, I'm still seeing more and more confirmation from my reading and things I'm still watching from the last year that all point to the soft parts, the soft skills and the relationships between humans, AI not being able to tap into because it can't, and in terms of person-to-person business decisions, because of the fact that it doesn't feel emotion. It can't quite register that. It can't quite react to that. So yeah, that's kind of where I'd go.
So I'll ask one AI question because
Okay.
it's hard to talk about digital design and smart city and all the other buzzwords without AI.
using
But
AI.
I suppose the one AI question to ask, and
Right.
it's hard, as we mentioned today, it's hard to talk about digital design and all the other big things going on in the design process without mentioning AI. I think it's going to obviously play a big role in that. Where do you see some of the biggest impacts from AI adoption today, in either both or a singular one?
I think I touched on this already, but I'll just I'll mention it. I mean, obviously, from a visualizations perspective, it's a done deal. It's already in the mix. It's already disrupting the way that projects develop those initial visualizations. I think if anything, all the companies that do rendering tools should really be working out where does this sit in terms of their features and how are they really going to get this into the mix very quickly before there's an erosion of their own products. That should be their top priority. I think where does it sit other than that? I think it's been fascinating from my perspective when you see phrases like co-pilots and assistants and stuff like that, because clearly it's being seen as a partner to the way you work rather than it taking over. Now I think that reality will have to continue. I'm hoping, rather than it become the leader in the whole approach. But I think the visualization pieces, creating representations, definitely. The output at the more detailed levels, I don't think it's nowhere near where it needs to be to be truly disruptive in terms of how things happen. The computer vision side of it definitely is going to be very interesting to see how it plays out on that side of things, and it already has been for a fair few years. I think other than that, I think it's there's an element of me that's quite excited about it, because there's in terms of, we've always spoken about complexity of project delivery and the challenges around trying to aggregate information, get things organized enough. I think every architect out there has had many an evening, trying to get things organized, and some of it being non-value adding tasks, they've had to take on. And I think that's where now, whether that's AI or just automation, is a huge kind of topic and question on that. But I do think that there's definitely opportunities there for it to take away some of the administrative work that we're all trying to tackle. And I think the chat side of things is going to be really interesting. I also think it's going to be an area where different generations are using it in different ways, and I think that's going to be really interesting to see how that plays out, because we have everyone using it from a method of Google searching to some generations of people using it as a lifestyle decision maker for you and things like that.
Especially the younger generation, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. They see it as a way of saying, I'm not feeling great today. Give me some tips on how to feel better, or I'm thinking to have a relaxed day. What sort of things would you schedule for me today? That sort of thing. I think I think some of the interesting stuff I've read a lot on is talking about how it's one day going to be like an operating system, so it sits as that invisible layer, and even that's going to bring up loads of questions around bias and where the direct and how much we can trust the data and information that it outputs and all that sort of stuff. But I think in the short term, and I mean short term in terms of 1-2 years, I don't think much further than that. The advancements around how it engages with imagery and how it reviews data and interrogates documents and gives us feedback is already way along the line of where it will go. So let's see.
So you mentioned the future there. Obviously, I suppose that's to wrap up as a final question.
Sure.
I know you don't look too much beyond 1 or 2 years, but I suppose looking forward, I suppose what excites you, which is what's coming. I suppose what is exciting you, and I suppose what are you excited to be part of what you're actually going to build, I suppose, because you've been on this, like you mentioned, 25 years. Not to say what's the next 25 years look like,
right.
Get your crystal ball out. But it would be interesting to see what, I suppose, the next 5 years of building something and what's exciting you today.
I think what's exciting me today, and I think one of the areas I think I've spoken to yourselves about in the past, which I think is that concept about we know that potentially AI is going to impact the world of coding and the development of coding, and taking away the need to code, because the AI would take a lot of that out of our hands. I think what will be interesting, and again I do try to look 1 to 5 years. Maybe that's optimistic. Sometimes I've clearly found that it's actually more like 1 to 10 years, 1 to 20 years in terms of where I think we'll be. So who knows how close or quick this stuff would happen, but I think the idea of people being able to build custom applications themselves on the fly for a need on a project that may get reused, may not, doesn't potentially need to be. We've spoken a huge amount in the past about as an industry of how do we align how people produce code and produce products and things like that. And if all of a sudden that doesn't really matter too much, because it doesn't matter how an AI builds it, as long as it's quick and we can throw it away and make a new product that does similar scenarios but maybe slightly tweaked. I think that is going to be really exciting, I think, to see how that plays out, because are we going to end up in a world where we've all made really custom tools that are completely specific to our own companies or our own industry, or our own areas of project work, or are we going to end up with these larger behemoths that kind of say, look, everyone aligned to this way of working? I think we kind of thought that we were going to move towards alignment and moving towards everyone working in the same way. And I think what we're realizing, and I think we're reflecting on, is that upon reflection, is that it's not probably going to go that way. And again, you really, really do have to take a portfolio approach on everything, and it's not going to get any easier. Where I'm excited as well, and then maybe this is because I'm a bit of a I like my movies. I watch a lot of movies. It's my form of escapism. The Blade Runners and all those of the world spoke about these huge towers and huge skyscrapers and worlds and cities where we have 200 plus stories as an easy or normal kind of thing, a normal kind of way of living for many people, or 100 story or whatever, you know. And obviously that's not quite proven that way. And it's one of those boundaries where I'm really curious to see how that plays out. But I would love to say that, you know, we're going to start seeing, you know, these metropolises growing at, instead of horizontally, maybe some more vertical, you know, and seeing that world go that way. I think that would be really exciting for myself. You know, I think I was reading last week this article talking about this tower in New York. It's like supposed to be a very, very thin, small tower, very tall. I can't remember the name of it, but it's like a needle kind of shape type thing, but it's square. And it's in the middle. Again, for those listening to this, I apologise, I should know the name of it, but it's in Manhattan, and it's very tall, very thin. And the reason I mention that is that it was seen initially when it was being designed, when I was following it years ago, was going to be as a way to do repeat design very easily, and really be able to build this building just as quickly as, you know, the skyscrapers that we see in New York, the Empire State Building, all that, you know, all those ones that are often used as the examples of perfection on speed. And the weird thing with that one was that it was like eroded, and, you know, they were showing that the sway had messed up loads of the concrete, and it wasn't feeling, there was loads of people suing the company that had made it because the sway at the top is way too high to in terms of the movement for people to feel comfortable. And so you kind of think, gosh, okay, so even if we can build it tall, we haven't quite got the materials piece quite right for everyone to feel that they're getting a good result. So let's see.
No, that's awesome. Well, look, I think I could speak to you for another hour, 2 hours.
Me too, yeah.
It's been really good to get your insights. So, cool. Firstly, thank you very much for joining the podcast. Andrew, your insights are great. I'm really excited to see the future and also see what you build in the next 3 years, whether that's a very tall skyscraper from Broadway Malyan. You never know, so it'll be interesting. But thank you very much for being on today's podcast. And
thanks for having me. A great podcast. I'll keep listening, definitely.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you. So that's a wrap on today's conversation. A huge thank you to Andrew Victory for sharing his insights and perspective on where the digital design is heading and how smarter cities can and should be shaped by more than just data and dashboards. If this episode made you think differently about the future of architecture design, leadership or urban innovation, make sure you follow the series and join the conversation. You've been listening to the AEC Innovators Circle, a podcast designed to explore the leading trends, topics and events shaping the architecture, engineering and construction industry. Here, we speak with the boldest minds who are redefining what's possible and driving the future of AEC. I'm your host, Karl Smith. Thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you in the next episode.